The first time I saw her, she was sitting in a glass case inside a quiet wooden temple in Hokkaido. At first glance, she looked like any other traditional Japanese doll. Porcelain skin, round cheeks, tiny lips curved into a faint smile. But then my eyes were drawn to her hair. It wasn't a wig. It wasn't synthetic. It was real. Black, silky strands that spilled down past her shoulders, curling unnaturally at the ends. The kind of hair that had grown, not been made. The monk who let me into Mannenji Temple didn't say much. He pointed to a placard next to the display. Okiku, spirit doll, hair grows continuously. I laughed under my breath. Of course, it was just folklore. A tourist attraction, maybe. But as I leaned closer, staring into her dark, glassy eyes, I swear to God I saw something shift. Only slightly. Like the eyes weren't made of glass at all. Like they were watching me. I didn't sleep well that night, not because of the jet lag, not because of the cold tatami floor in my Rokan room, but because every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of her. In the dream, I was standing in the temple again. But this time, the glass case was open. Okiku was gone. I turned around, and she was standing behind me. Not sitting, standing. The doll's head slowly tilted up, her eyes empty, lips trembling, and then, in a voice like a child whispering through broken teeth, she said, "Where is my sister?" I woke up drenched in sweat. The window was wide open, even though I'd closed it the night before, and on the floor, just beneath the sill, was a single black hair. Too long to be mine, too thick to be from the pillows. I flushed it down the sink, trying not to look at my reflection. For some reason, I didn't want to see my own eyes. The next morning, I returned to Mannenji Temple. I had no reason to go back, but something pulled me there, like a string wrapped around my spine. When I arrived, the temple was nearly empty. The monk was sweeping the steps. He gave me a look. "You shouldn't come again." His English was slow but clear. I asked why. He didn't answer, just pointed toward the shrine, then said, "She remembers people." Inside, the light was dimmer than before. Candles flickered at the edges of the tatami room, casting long shadows across the walls. I stood in front of the display, waiting for something to happen. Anything. And then I noticed it. Her hair. It was longer than it had been yesterday. I stared at the photos on the wall, old, grainy black and whites of the doll from decades ago. In one, her hair only touched her chin. In another, her shoulders. Now, today, it was past her chest. It was growing. Still. I asked the monk later about the history of the doll. He sat me down in the back of the temple and poured bitter tea into a cracked ceramic cup. He told me the story. Okiku was once owned by a little girl. The doll and the girl shared a name. Her brother bought it for her from Sapporo back in 1918. The girl loved the doll deeply. She spoke to it, dressed it, fed it small grains of rice. Every day she carried it with her, until one winter the girl caught a sudden illness. High fever, cold lungs. She died within days. The family placed the doll on the household altar, praying for the girl's soul. But then, the hair began to grow. At first, they thought it was grief. Maybe they were imagining things. But it grew longer, and the doll's mouth seemed to curl into a smile. A priest examined it and confirmed, "The hair is human. The spirit of the child is inside." The family, overcome by fear, donated the doll to the temple. But even the monks grew afraid. Now they keep it locked away. They trim the hair regularly, but it always grows back. "Do you cut it?" I asked. The monk shook his head. "Only one does. The same one. Every month." I asked him how they knew it was really haunted. He answered with a whisper, Because when we forget, the dreams return. That night I dreamed again. This time the temple was burning. I stood inside, choking on the smoke, and through the flames I saw her, Okiku, sitting on the floor, untouched by fire. She was crying, not screaming, just soft, slow sobs, and her hair slithered across the floor like black snakes. She looked at me and whispered, "Bring me back." I woke up in a panic. My fingernails had dug into my palms. There were strands of black hair on my pillow, and on my phone screen, somehow unlocked, was a photo. A photo I hadn't taken. A photo of the doll zoomed in. Her eyes looked wrong. They were open wider than before. Too wide. I left Hokkaido the next day, but the dreams followed. And so did the hair. It started showing up in my apartment in New York, on the floor, in the shower drain, inside sealed drawers. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, that it was just some mental afterimage, trauma from too much ghost hunting. But I know better. The hair grows, and I've seen her, even here, in the reflection of subway windows, in the flicker of the TV when it's off. She's with me now. They say Okiku's soul is that of a child too young to understand death, that she clings to the last thing that made her feel alive, that her spirit is gentle as long as you don't ignore her. But if you do, if you walk away without saying goodbye, she follows, and she waits. I made a mistake. I visited. I looked into her eyes. I turned my back. And now I can't undo what I've invited in. So if you're watching this, and thinking of going to Mannenji Temple to see the doll yourself, don't. Because if you look too long, if she remembers you, her hair won't be the only thing that follows you home. They said the doll never blinked. It had been 2 weeks since I first visited the temple that housed Okiku, the haunted doll whose hair grew inexplicably. I didn't believe it at first. Urban legends are often like that. Tall tales wrapped in superstition. But something had been pulling me back. A presence. A whisper beneath the silence of the shrine's wooden corridors. I had returned to Hokkaido, not for spiritual pilgrimage, not even curiosity anymore. It was obsession. I wanted to see it again. To see her again. The snow outside thickened into a heavy hush. I reached the entrance of Mannenji Temple, a place that had once been silent in my memory. Now, every step I took across its floorboards seemed to echo unnaturally, like the building was exhaling around me. My breath misted in front of me, even though I hadn't felt cold until I crossed the threshold. The priest greeted me with the same tired eyes. "You again?" he muttered in Japanese, brushing off snow from his shoulders. "Okiku doesn't like too many visits. She remembers faces." I forced a smile. "Does she remember voices, too?" He didn't answer, only gave a slight bow and gestured for me to follow. The room housing Okiku had no windows, just one soft paper lantern flickering in the corner and a faint scent of sandalwood incense. The doll stood on her pedestal, encased in a glass box taller than me. Her kimono, once vibrant, had faded to a sun-washed pink. Her hair now touched past her waist. I blinked. No, I didn't imagine that. Her bangs were longer than last time. "Every 2 weeks," the priest murmured behind me, as if reading my thoughts. "We trim it. Sometimes it grows back within hours." He walked to a drawer, pulling out a yellowed envelope. Inside, a photograph. He handed it to me. She had short hair when she was first placed here. The photo was decades old. The same doll. Identical kimono, porcelain white face, black eyes, but the hair barely reached her shoulders. Now she looked almost lifelike. I couldn't tear my eyes away from her. It wasn't just the hair. It was her expression. Calm, but expectant. Like she was waiting for something. Or someone. "Where did she come from?" I asked quietly. The priest lit another stick of incense and sighed. His voice, worn by years of repetition, began the tale I knew only in pieces. In 1918, a boy named Eikichi Suzuki bought the doll for his younger sister, Okiku. She adored it, named it after herself. They were inseparable, slept together, ate together, dressed it daily. But then, she died. Cold, fever, gone before she was 6. He walked slowly toward the box, placing a hand on the glass without touching it. The family was so stricken they couldn't bear to part with the doll. They claimed her spirit had fused with it. The hair began to grow, and sometimes they'd hear her. Little footsteps in the night, the sound of humming. My chest tightened. And then, they brought her here, offered her to the temple for safekeeping, but she never left. That night, I stayed nearby in a small ryokan, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the doll, not standing, sitting, on the edge of my futon, just watching, waiting, her long black hair falling across her face like wet threads. When I did finally drift off, the dreams were violent. Dark corridors, wooden floors creaking, and that whisper again, the one I had dismissed. But now I could make it out. Words laced in breath and rust. Why did you leave me? I sat bolt upright in bed, drenched in sweat. The room was empty, but something had changed. My duffel bag lay half open in the corner, and next to it, on the tatami mat floor, was a single strand of black hair. I returned to the temple the next morning. The priest looked at me and said nothing, just handed me a small white envelope. Inside, another strand of hair. Do you know what she wants? I asked, my voice shaking. She wants to be remembered, he said. She wants to finish something she never could. Death left her story incomplete. That night, I made a mistake. I asked to be alone with her. The priest hesitated, but agreed. I sat cross-legged in the incense-filled room, the glass box fogging lightly as I breathed. I stared at her, and she stared back. "Okiku," I whispered, not knowing why I was even speaking aloud. "Do you know who I am?" No answer, of course, but my reflection in the glass wasn't quite right. My own eyes didn't blink when I did. My posture was stiff, mirrored wrong. My head cocked just slightly, not the way I moved it. I stumbled backward, hitting the corner of the pedestal. The lantern flickered, went out, and in the dark, I heard it. A soft, dragging shuffle. Hair brushing wood. Then a voice, gentle, childlike, almost mournful. "Will you play with me?" The door slammed open. The priest stood there, lantern in hand. "Out! Now!" I didn't argue. Outside, the snow had stopped, but the quiet was heavier than ever. "She tried to attach to you," the priest said grimly. "She chooses people sometimes, especially those who return. She thinks you can help her finish what was left behind." "Finish what?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "Maybe you already know." And part of me did. That night, in the safety of the inn, I pulled out an old photo album my grandmother had passed to me years ago. Inside, pressed between 2 pages, was a yellowing photo of a child. A little girl in kimono, hair chopped short, and in her hands, the same doll. I never knew who she was, just a distant cousin from Hokkaido who died young. Her name? Okiku Suzuki. That's when it all unraveled. That's when the dreams began to show me more. Rooms I'd never seen, yet recognized. A voice calling to me like blood humming in my ears. Not just a ghost, but a story unfinished. And now I was part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. The third night was when I first heard the whispering. I had returned from work, drenched in a downpour that had clung to me like something alive. The lights in my apartment flickered as if unsure whether to welcome me back or reject me entirely. The Okiku doll sat on its shelf, framed in a small pool of light beneath the hanging scroll. Her black hair now reached her shoulders. It was impossible. Just 3 days ago, it barely brushed the base of her neck. I stared at her, my body frozen mid-step, the sound of rain tapping the window behind me. I convinced myself it was memory playing tricks, that I hadn't noticed the length before, that maybe I had overreacted. Maybe. But then came the whisper, faint, fleeting. A voice so light it barely lifted above the air. Son. The sound struck deep, not into my ears, but into my bones. I whirled around. No one. Again, soft, like breath moving through silk. Son. Mother, in Japanese. And it had come from the direction of the doll. The next morning I told myself it was sleep paralysis, the exhaustion, maybe even the storm amplifying ambient sounds. But the voice didn't go away. It followed me through the apartment, soft, almost apologetic. Son, Doko? Where are you, Mother? It wasn't just a whisper now. It was a question, a longing. I did something stupid. I answered. Not your mother, I whispered back. And then I heard the doll laugh. Not loud, not wild, but a tiny childlike giggle that should have been innocent, but wasn't. The sound didn't carry joy. It carried hunger. Out of desperation, I contacted the antique store again. The old man answered, his voice raspy. I tried to warn you, he said. You shouldn't have taken her. What is it? Why does it... Talk to me, I asked, voice shaking. There was a pause, a long one. Because you answered. That was all he said before hanging up. I stopped sleeping. Even with every light on, I could hear her breathing at night. I don't know how to explain that. Dolls don't breathe. But I could hear it, shallow, rhythmic, like a child curled beside me in the dark, waiting for a bedtime story. The hair had grown longer, now past her shoulders, thick and tangled. I tried to trim it, desperate to break whatever was happening. The scissors wouldn't cut. They snapped, twice, then refused to function altogether, as if the hair repelled metal. I reached for my phone to take a photo to send it to someone, anyone, for help. The screen stayed black. Every photo I took of her showed nothing but a pitch-black shape. No eyes, no face, just void. That was the night I dreamed of the temple. A crumbling, wind-worn Shinto shrine set high on a jagged mountain. In the dream, I climbed for hours. The path was littered with dolls, headless, broken, watching me with invisible eyes. When I reached the shrine, I saw a girl, no more than 6, kneeling before the torii gate. Her kimono was torn, stained with something dark. She turned slowly, revealing a pale face with empty sockets where her eyes should have been. She pointed at me and whispered, "You let me in." I woke up screaming, and the doll was no longer on the shelf. She was sitting on my bed. I tried to return her. The antique shop was gone. I don't mean closed, I mean gone. Boarded up, dust covered, no trace that it had been open in the last 20 years. The window was cracked and smeared with grime. When I peered inside, all I saw were collapsed shelves and cobwebs. No sign of life, no sign of the old man. I walked away fast, my breathing loud in the silence, and then I heard it again, from inside my coat. Son. She had come with me. I hadn't even brought the doll, but she was there, always there. I began to document everything. I made recordings, audio, video, but none of it stayed. Files corrupted, drives fried. Even writing by hand ended with ink bleeding across the paper as if the words rejected themselves. At night, she stood closer to my bed. Her hair now touched the floor. I once saw it move, shifting like seaweed in deep water, alive, curious. Sometimes it reached toward me. I visited a local temple. The priest was young, distracted, not the kind who believed in curses or spirits. But I showed him a sketch of the doll. His face turned pale. "She belongs to something very old," he said. When I asked for an exorcism, he refused. "That type of spirit doesn't leave," he whispered. "It doesn't want to. And if you make it angry..." He never finished his sentence, but I didn't need him to. That night, my apartment turned cold. Not chilly, frozen. My breath fogged in the air, the walls frosted over with a layer of ice that shimmered in the moonlight. The doll stood by the window, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her eyes, once painted black, had depth now. Real depth. Like if I stared too long, I might fall in. The whispering was constant now. Not just in Japanese. In languages I didn't recognize. Harsh, ancient syllables that scraped against my sanity like nails on glass. Then came the footsteps. Light, barefoot, around my bed. I buried myself in the sheets. And I heard her climb up. The creak of the mattress. The brush of her hair across my cheek. "Ka-san, Daisuke. I love you, Mother." Her breath was cold against my skin. I moved out the next day, left everything behind. Clothes, furniture, memories. The doll, too. Or so I thought, because last night I opened my new apartment door. And there she was, sitting in the center of the floor, her hair now trailing behind her like a veil, her eyes open, watching. The museum lights had dimmed. Outside, the snow whispered against the windows of the shrine, blanketing the world in a heavy, suffocating silence. Inside the wooden building, a darker silence pulsed beneath the surface, thick, ancient, and hungry. Masaru had not returned any of Akiko's messages. He hadn't shown up for 2 days, and she hadn't stopped dreaming. She sat hunched on the tatami mat floor, her knees drawn tightly to her chest, eyes fixed on the case that held Okiku. The doll stared back, her eyes glassy and vacant. But it was her hair that unnerved Akiko most. It was longer, not by much, perhaps a centimeter, but she had measured it carefully the day before. She knew. No one else believed her, not her colleagues, not the caretaker who said, "The doll's always had long hair. It's part of the mystery. People like to think it grows." But Akiko knew it wasn't just folklore. It was real. That night she dreamt again. But this time, she wasn't in the shrine. She was in a narrow hallway lined with mirrors. The reflections were warped, faces stretched into grotesque parodies of her own. Her breath came out in clouds, though there was no cold. And from the far end of the corridor she could hear footsteps, bare, small, like a child. Tap, tap, tap. She turned. Behind her, one of the mirrors rippled like water, and through the shifting glass she saw a girl. A girl with long black hair, wearing a faded kimono, her hands pressed against the other side of the mirror, and her mouth was sewn shut. Akiko woke with a scream, but no sound came out. She clutched her throat, gasping. The room spun around her, and for a moment she couldn't tell if she was awake or still dreaming. Her breath fogged the cold air, and she stumbled to the bathroom to splash her face with water. The mirror was fogged over. Her reflection did not quite match. Behind her, a shadow moved. She spun around. Nothing. But the air had changed, charged with static, like the moment before a lightning strike, and the silence was no longer empty. It was watching. Later that morning, she found the photo. An old, curled photograph tucked into a drawer in the museum's archive room. She hadn't meant to find it. She'd been searching for something else. but the photograph called to her. It was a black and white portrait of a girl, the same girl from her dream, wearing the same kimono, standing beside the Okikudoll, which was placed on a wooden pedestal. But the most disturbing thing, the girl looked exactly like Akiko. Same eyes, same mouth, even the mole on the cheek. It wasn't possible. She turned the photo over. A single word had been scrawled in ink, faded with time. Yomei. That night, she stayed in the shrine. She brought incense, salt, a charm from the temple, and her recorder. She set everything up carefully, following the old priest's vague instructions. But deep down, she knew none of it would work. Not against this. Still, she had to try. As the hours passed, the temperature dropped. 2:30, 13 a.m. The recorder clicked on. She sat in front of the doll's case, eyes half-lidded, whispering into the stillness. Who are you? Silence. What do you want? Stillness. She looked directly into the doll's eyes. Why me? The recorder crackled. Then, a soft child's voice, but not from the recorder, from inside the room. You're me. Akiko froze. The hairs on her arms stood straight up. Slowly, she turned toward the voice. There was no one there, but the doll's mouth, it was slightly open, a tiny seam between her porcelain lips, and inside she saw teeth. She ran. She didn't remember grabbing her bag, didn't remember opening the doors. She just remembered the feeling of being chased, though there were no footsteps behind her, no breathing, just the sense that if she looked over her shoulder, something would be there. She didn't sleep that night. She barely made it to the train station. She didn't return to the shrine the next day, or the day after. She didn't check her phone. She didn't eat. She lay on the floor of her apartment, curtain drawn, lights off. But Okiku was still there. Not in the physical sense, but in the mirrors, in the corners of her vision, in her dreams, especially her dreams. In them, she was trapped inside the doll case, pressing her hands to the glass. And outside, a girl, another version of her, stood smiling. Her hair, long and black, growing longer with each second. You gave me your name, the reflection whispered. You gave me your face. And then, you belong to me now. When Akiko woke, there were strands of long black hair on her pillow. Not her own. They were too coarse, too cold, and they smelled of dirt and age. She checked the mirror. The girl in the reflection blinked a moment after she did. That was when she knew. Okiku wasn't just haunted. She was the haunting. She didn't live in the doll. She lived in the name, the memory, the recognition. And by acknowledging her, by looking too long, by saying her name aloud, Akiko had opened a door that could never be closed. Later that week, the shrine's caretaker finally broke into Akiko's apartment after she hadn't returned any messages or been seen in town. What he found was a cold, silent apartment, every mirror covered in cloth, except one. And in the center of the room was a doll, porcelain-skinned, glass-eyed, hair that trailed all the way down her back. And she looked so much like Akiko, he staggered back. His hand trembled as he reached for his phone. But before he could call anyone, the doll blinked. It was the stillness that unsettled him most. Thomas McCleary, a well-known paranormal photographer from San Francisco, had traveled across continents capturing cursed artifacts, haunted ruins, and allegedly possessed dolls. He wasn't afraid of spirits, at least not until he came face to face with Okiku. He had heard whispers of the doll from an online occult forum, a small porcelain figure housed in the Mannenji Temple in Hokkaido, Japan. The rumors were almost laughable. Hair that grew on its own, a spirit of a dead child. clergy who refused to destroy it. But what intrigued him most were the reports of people who took her photograph and disappeared. Naturally, he was drawn to it like a moth to flame. The temple was quiet when he arrived. A thin mist blanketed the ground, curling around the red beams and ancient lanterns. Despite the peaceful appearance, Thomas's gut churned. He entered with permission, after a strange conversation with one of the monks who had warned him with a firm, furrowed brow. She must not be provoked. Do not ask her name out loud. Do not speak to her as if she is a child. And do not photograph her without her blessing. Thomas had nodded, trying not to roll his eyes. But inside, he was already planning his shots. The angles, the lighting, the dramatic zoom into her glassy black eyes. What harm could a doll do? When he first saw Okiku, she was even smaller than he expected. Just under 40 centimeters tall. She sat in a glass case, draped in a crimson kimono with faded embroidery. Her tiny hands were curled into soft fists on her lap, and her hair, thick, black, and coarse, spilled down past her shoulders, brushing her knees. It was the eyes that stopped him. They weren't just painted orbs like other dolls. These looked wet, reflective, alive. For a second, Thomas thought they flicked toward him, but when he blinked, she was still. Creepy little thing, he muttered and lifted his camera. A click, a second, flash. The room darkened, then lightened again. He checked the viewfinder. The photo was there, but oddly blurred. He adjusted the focus and took another. Click. Then, something tapped. Tap, 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 the glass case. From the inside. Thomas looked up. Okiku's head had tilted, just slightly. Her chin dipped forward, and a thin lock of black hair slid from her cheek. He stared at her. I didn't imagine that, he whispered. Click. Another photo. Another tap. This time her mouth was slightly open. He stepped back. She hadn't moved before he blinked. You're just tired, he said aloud, but his voice cracked. As he packed up his gear, the monk from earlier appeared behind him. You took her picture? He asked, not angrily, just solemnly. Thomas hesitated. I did. Why? The monk's expression was unreadable. Did you ask her first? It's a doll, Thomas replied, trying to laugh. The monk did not. That night, back at his hotel, Thomas reviewed the photos. One by one, each shot more distorted than the last. In the final frame, Okiku's eyes were looking directly into the lens. He shut the laptop. Forget it, he told himself. Digital glitch. Overactive imagination. He didn't sleep. The next morning, he noticed something odd in the mirror. A thin red scratch ran across his cheek. He hadn't remembered scratching himself, or bumping into anything. It was straight, clean, and shallow, as if made by a tiny fingernail. Then came the whispering. It began softly, like a radio playing in another room. A girl's voice, humming. He searched the hotel room. Nothing. No guests in the hallway. No TV. When he returned to his laptop, a new folder had appeared. Okiku. Inside it was one photo, not one he had taken. It was a picture of him sleeping in bed, taken from the foot of the mattress. He slammed the laptop shut and backed away. That night he dreamt of her. He stood in the temple again. The room was dark. Candles flickered. Okiku was not in her case. She was standing at the threshold. She lifted her hand and pointed at him. Then she screamed. He woke up gasping. His phone buzzed. It was a message from a friend back in San Francisco. Are you okay? I got an email with a weird photo. Looked like you, but your eyes were gone? Thomas threw the phone across the room. He had enough. He returned to the temple the next morning, unshaven and frantic. I want to delete the photos. Just make it stop, he pleaded. The monk nodded solemnly and led him to Okiku. He knelt before the case. I'm sorry, he whispered. I shouldn't have taken them. Okiku did not move. But her hair, it had grown. Where it had brushed her knees yesterday, it now touched the floor of the case. She was growing stronger. You must burn the photos, the monk said. Every copy, and delete the digital files. Then leave something personal with her, an offering. Thomas returned to his hotel and wiped everything. SD cards, hard drives, cloud backups. Then, from his wallet, he took a small photo of his sister who had died when they were young. It was the only copy he had. With a deep breath, he placed it in the offering box at the temple, just below the doll. He bowed. When he rose, Okiku's mouth was closed again. Her eyes were still. He left Japan the next day. 6 months later, Thomas stopped photographing cursed items. He never spoke of Okiku again. But one thing still haunts him. Every year, on the anniversary of the photo, a package arrives at his door. No return address. Inside, just a single photo of Okiku. And in every one, she's closer than before. The first thing I noticed when I woke up that morning wasn't the rain tapping on my window. It was the sound of soft brushing. Rhythmic. Patient. Like someone tending to a doll's hair. I lay still, breath caught in my throat. The sound came from just outside my bedroom door. Not a creak of floorboards or a shifting weight. Just the brushing. Slow strokes against long, dry strands. Brush, brush, brush. When I finally found the courage to move, I sat up and quietly pushed open the door. Nothing. The hallway was empty. The antique mirror still hung at an angle. The portrait of the Shinto shrine from Sapporo still watched me silently from its nail. But when I stepped toward the guest room where I kept Okiku, the brushing stopped. I opened the door. The doll sat where she always did, upright on the wooden chair, hands in her lap, her kimono undisturbed. But her hair, God help me, was longer than yesterday. Not just by a little. The silky black strands now reached her elbows, a full 2 inches longer than when I had locked the room the night before. I didn't scream. I didn't touch her. I simply closed the door again. Slowly, carefully, as if I were locking in something ancient, something patient. I tried to rationalize, tried to believe it was my imagination, a trick of memory, stress, anything. But as the week passed, the hair kept growing, inch by inch. By Friday, it touched her fingertips. I finally took her to the university. Dr. Yamazaki, a Japanese cultural anthropologist who specialized in ritual artifacts, agreed to meet me on short notice. He was a serious man with graying hair, sharp eyes, and hands that trembled slightly. Not from age, but from what he'd seen in his field. When I unwrapped the doll in his office, the room went still. The temperature felt colder somehow. Even the fluorescent lights above flickered. He didn't touch her. Where did you get this? He asked. From a second-hand shop in Aomori. The seller said it had been donated by a family in Hokkaido. I believe it's her, the Okikudoll. He nodded slowly, but I saw his Adam's apple bob. May I examine her more closely? I nodded. He donned gloves and pulled out a magnifying lens. He studied the face first, then the kimono, then the hair. When he got to the scalp, he paused, then cursed softly in Japanese. What? I asked. The hair, it's human, not synthetic, not horse, not silk, human, and not from a wig. It's rooted into the scalp like it grew from within. My chest tightened. How is that possible? He sat back, suddenly exhausted. In 1918, a girl named Okiku died of a fever. Her brother had bought her this doll, this exact doll, as a gift. After her death, The family claimed the girl's spirit inhabited the doll. When they moved away, they left it at Mannenji Temple. The monks verified her hair grew continuously. They trimmed it regularly. But now, he trailed off, staring at the doll as if it might move. She was never meant to be in your home. The spirit is restless. I should have handed her over then and there. I should have left her on his desk and walked away. But I didn't. Somewhere inside me, something resisted. Like an invisible tether had wound itself around my spine, anchoring me to her, to Okiku. I brought her home. And that night, everything escalated. At 2:13 a.m., I woke to my bedroom lights flickering violently. The overhead bulb buzzed like a hornet's nest, then burst. Shards rained to the floor. The temperature dropped instantly. I could see my breath. Then the brushing sound returned. Only this time it wasn't outside my door. It was inside the room. I turned my head ever so slowly to the foot of my bed. And there she was. The doll sat on the mattress, legs folded beneath her, hair brushing down past her waist now. In her hand, one of mine. The small wooden hairbrush I'd never seen her use. She was brushing her own hair. Brush, brush, brush. I bolted upright, knocking over the lamp, scrambling for the light switch. The room blazed to life. The doll was gone, but the brush lay on the bed, right where she had sat, and on the pillow beside it, a clump of long black human hair. I didn't sleep after that. By morning, I had decided to return her to the temple in Hokkaido. I called Dr. Yamazaki. He agreed instantly. "I'll come with you," he said. "She doesn't want to be here. You need to act before she roots too deep." His phrasing chilled me. Roots? Spirits can embed themselves into a space, into objects, even into people. Before we left, I wrapped her in layers of black cloth, tied her tightly with red twine just like the traditional onmyoji sealing rituals. I even placed a strip of ofuda paper, inscribed with purification kanji, over her heart. She didn't resist. But I swear, when I carried her out of the house, the air behind me felt heavier, thicker, like something was watching me from the walls. The road to the temple was long. Snow began falling by the time we reached the outskirts of Hokkaido. At some point, the radio in the car started playing static, then whispers, incoherent, garbled Japanese phrases, like a broken lullaby sung in reverse. Dr. Yamazaki shut it off. He didn't say a word. When we arrived at Mannenji Temple, a young monk met us at the gate. He saw the bundle in my arms, his expression darkening. "She has returned," he whispered. They led us into a candle-lit room with tatami floors and incense burning in thick clouds. I placed the doll at the center of the altar. The monks bowed. Then they began chanting, low, resonant, rhythms that felt like they moved the air itself. The doll remained still, but then one candle blew out, then another, and another, until the room was drowned in shadows. Then the chanting stopped, and something laughed. A child's laugh, soft, joyful, but wrong. So wrong. The narrow hallway beyond the nursery was darker than the rest of the temple. As they stepped inside, the lights flickered violently overhead, not the dim, natural flicker of faulty electricity, but a pulse like a heartbeat. A heartbeat not human. A heartbeat that echoed through the floor beneath them, that hummed in the very walls. Jack took a step forward. The floor creaked, not under his feet, but ahead, as if something was waiting and had shifted its weight. "You smell that?" Maya whispered. It wasn't just incense anymore. The sweet fragrance was gone. What replaced it was coppery and thick, the undeniable scent of fresh blood. Jack nodded, grimly. "We're close." They entered a circular chamber, the ritual room. The walls were lined with black wood, charred with soot, and decorated with strange Japanese symbols drawn in red ink. some still glistening as if recently painted. The floor was inscribed with an enormous occult circle, filled with kanji and unfamiliar glyphs that crawled like insects when stared at too long. And in the center of the room, Okiku. Her doll form sat inside a glass shrine, but the glass was shattered now, cracks spiderwebbing out like frozen screams. Her head was tilted. Her hair, now well past her waist, writhed slowly as if moved by an unseen breeze. The air around her shimmered with heat and cold simultaneously. But it wasn't just the doll. Behind it stood the shrine maiden, or what used to be her. Her robes were soaked in blood, not her own. Her eyes were hollow, rolled white. Her jaw unhinged with a sickening crack as she spoke, voice doubled and distorted. "You shouldn't have come." Jack raised the charm Father Arai had entrusted to them. "We know what you are." The maiden convulsed. Her body cracked backward, bones breaking and resetting with unnatural fluidity. From her mouth came a choking, shrieking wail. It echoed with multiple voices, male and female, old and young, human and inhuman. Then silence. Suddenly, the doll's eyes moved, not subtly but with conscious, deliberate force. They locked onto Maya. She froze. Jack moved in front of her. "We have the sealing scroll. We can end this." The maiden doll hybrid laughed, or tried to, but it came out like wet coughing. She stepped back, her feet floating inches above the ground. Her fingers lengthened, curling like spider legs. "End it? She is not a curse. She is a gate." And then everything happened at once. The circle on the ground lit up with blinding red. Shadows erupted from the floor like geysers. Screams, thousands of them, filled the room. The walls bled. The glyphs melted into the wood and oozed downward like ink, running backward up a page. Jack gritted his teeth and pulled Maya to the edge of the circle. The charm began to glow, but flickered weakly. "It's not enough," Maya gasped. "We need to finish the ritual." She scrambled for the scroll Father Arai had hidden in her backpack. Her hands trembled as she unfurled it. The paper was ancient, ink faded, but the text still burned with strange energy. Jack read it aloud, his voice barely audible over the howling storm. "By the light of the True One, by the name that seals, by the silence of the gate." The maiden screamed, and her body shattered into black ash. But the doll remained, and now it stood, no longer a passive vessel. Okiku's body twisted as limbs unfolded, porcelain cracking, revealing flesh beneath. Her head tilted, her hair levitating like a curtain around her. She opened her mouth, and from within came a voice not her own. "I am hunger. I am grief made form. I was born from the death of a child and fed by the tears of the living." The shrine shook. The ceiling cracked open, revealing the dark sky above. The moon hung low, stained red, and the sound of bells ringing backward filled the air. Maya continued the chant. The scroll caught fire in her hands, but she did not stop. "Bind her to silence. Bind her to sleep. Return the gate to where it weeps," Okiku screamed, not in fear, but fury. Her hair shot outward like living whips, slicing through the air. One strand cut Jack's cheek. Blood sprayed across the floor. Where it touched the glyphs, the entire seal flared brighter. Jack, wounded, crawled to the center and planted the charm over the doll's heart. "Now, Maya," he shouted. She pressed her hand over his. Together, they shouted the last word. "Be Zeep Meru, Tojukameru, seal it away." A blast of cold wind exploded outward. The shadows shrieked as they were sucked back into the doll. The glyphs reversed, spiraling inward. The walls of the temple groaned, as if being pulled inside themselves. Okiku's eyes widened, and for just a moment, she looked like a normal girl, terrified, alone. Then her eyes burst into flame, and she was gone. The room fell silent. The charm lay smoldering on the floor, its paper edges curling inward. Maya fell to her knees, gasping. Jack stared at the glass shrine, now empty again. "Is it over?" Maya asked, barely audible. Jack looked down at his hand. The cut was still bleeding, but the blood was black now, and it moved. There are no clocks in the room where Okiku is kept, but time seems to seep through the walls like cold mist. I had returned to the temple that week, driven by an obsession that was eating me from within. My footage, blurry, corrupted, impossible, had turned into a viral enigma online. But none of the viewers knew the full story. None of them had heard what I heard that night, not even the monks. I asked to see Okiku again. The head priest hesitated this time. "She has been agitated." Agitated. That word shouldn't be used to describe a doll. "She knocked over her glass case last night," he continued, his eyes not meeting mine. "No one touched her. There were no tremors. We heard the crash, and when we ran in, she was facing the opposite direction. Hair scattered like..." He stopped. I didn't push him. I just waited, staring at the closed doors behind him. The room where she waited. He finally relented, motioning to a younger monk to unlock the chamber. Inside, it was colder than I remembered. The glass had been replaced, but Okiku sat in the center of her wooden pedestal like before, her black hair longer now. Unmistakably longer. It was fanned around her shoulders, the tips brushing the wooden platform like tiny, eager fingers. And her mouth, it looked parted. No one had ever mentioned her mouth moving. I stepped closer, my breath fogged on the glass. I pressed my hand against it instinctively and whispered, "Are you listening to me?" And from somewhere, within the glass, within the doll, or perhaps inside my own skull, I heard a whisper. It wasn't a voice exactly. It was hair, not the swaying sound of hair in the wind. It was the sound of hair growing. A dry, stretching hiss, fibers splitting, roots crawling under skin. I stepped back, suddenly nauseous. The room tilted. My vision blurred. And again I heard the whisper. This time it formed words. "Cut it." I spun around. The monks stood still by the doorway. Neither of them had spoken. I need to leave," I murmured. They didn't stop me. I returned to my hotel room and locked the door behind me. 3 times. I didn't unpack. I didn't eat. I sat at the foot of the bed and replayed my recordings. Every clip from that morning was silent. Eerily silent. The usual ambient noise was gone. No creaking floorboards, no wind, just void. Then, at the exact moment my hand had touched the glass, just a flicker of static, and then, cut it. There it was, distorted, metallic, unmistakable. I zoomed in. I enhanced the waveform. There was something beneath the voice. Layers. Layers of whispers, all piled on top of each other like suffocating hair in a clogged drain. Each one saying something different. One said, "I'm still cold." Another whispered, "She won't sleep." And a third, barely audible, "You saw her mouth, too." That night, I dreamt of her. In the dream, I was back in the chamber, alone. But this time, the glass was gone. The case shattered. Okiku was standing. Her kimono trailed behind her like a funeral shroud, her head tilted to one side. Her hair slithered around her feet like vines, growing even as I watched. She looked at me, her lips parted. A child's voice. "You promised you'd cut it." I woke up screaming. My pillow was wet. No, soaked. Not with sweat, with hair. Black, human hair. Strands of it, tangled around my fingers, embedded in the bed sheets, caught in my mouth. I vomited. I had to go back. One more time. I bought scissors from a nearby market. Old iron shears, the kind used in bonsai maintenance. Heavy, rusting. They felt right in my hands. When I returned to the temple, the head priest wouldn't let me in. "She's changing," he said. "We think she's attached to someone now." "Someone new?" I asked. "No," he said, eyes locked on mine. "She's attached to you." They didn't stop me when I broke in that night. I had memorized the layout. The squeaky floorboards, the way the lock jiggled if you twisted it just right. I told myself it was research. I told myself it was documentation. But the truth is, I had to cut it. I had to end the whispers. I stepped into the chamber. The glass case was already open. She was waiting. Okiku sat, motionless in her traditional kimono. But her head was tilted back, her hair now impossibly long, reaching her feet, coiling at the base like roots waiting to anchor. The scissors trembled in my hands. I approached slowly. Each step felt like it stretched a century. I felt her eyes on me, not just watching, pulling. And then as I knelt, as I reached out with the scissors, she smiled. It wasn't overt, just the faintest curve at the corner of her mouth, like a secret finally shared. I placed the scissors against the longest strand near her shoulder and began to cut. The hair screamed. A sound erupted from her like children wailing underwater. I dropped the scissors. My ears rang. Blood trickled down my neck. She wasn't smiling anymore. Now her lips moved, not smiling, mouthing. "I gave it to you." The hair surged forward. It wrapped around my wrists, my ankles, my throat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. And then, darkness. When I woke, I was in a hospital. They told me a monk had found me unconscious in the temple garden, bleeding from the ears, bruising on my neck. No sign of trauma otherwise, but I knew what had happened. I lifted my hand to rub my temple, and that's when I felt it. Hair, growing from my palm, long, black, silky. And inside my mind, like the ghost of a forgotten lullaby, I heard it again. "I gave it to you." The doll was no longer just a doll. We knew that the moment we opened the display case one last time. We hadn't touched Okiku in weeks, maybe months. After the shrine visit, we made a pact. Never again. But we failed to keep that promise, as most people do when they toy with things they don't understand. It began with the whispering. Again. Only this time it didn't come from the case. It came from the walls, the ceiling, the floorboards. Whispering that wasn't just faint, it was layered, like dozens of tiny voices overlapping, trying to harmonize into something human. They never succeeded. Sometimes they'd call a name, not just Okiku anymore. Sometimes it was Kana, my name. Sometimes I'd hear them humming the lullaby again, but slower now, dragged out, warped, off-key, as if sung underwater. My father had started locking his door at night, not for protection, but so no one would hear the sounds from inside, the muttering, the pacing, the laughing, and the scratching, that wretched scratching. When I stood outside his door at midnight, heart pounding, I could hear the unmistakable sound of nails, his or someone else's, scraping along the walls inside, or maybe the floor, as though someone were crawling around. But the next morning, everything would be clean, except for the hair. It would be on the kitchen counter, the bathroom mirror, in my soup, my closet, my shoes. Once, I pulled a strand of hair from my mouth mid-yawn. It felt never-ending, like some dark magician's trick. It kept coming and coming until I gagged and threw up bile from pure panic. A long, black clump dangled from my lips as I collapsed, sobbing. Still, the hair kept growing. We decided to burn the doll. Yes, finally. It wasn't an easy decision, not because we doubted it was haunted, but because something deep inside us resisted the idea. Something primal, as though a part of us had bonded with it. But when I found Mom crying in her sleep, hair wrapped tight around both her wrists like shackles, leaving deep red lines, that was the last straw. We drove out to the mountains, far, isolated, where no one would hear the screams if they came. The doll sat in a metal box in the back seat, dressed in her now tattered kimono, her eyes dull, yet somehow watchful. I didn't look back once on the drive. It was almost beautiful, the way the fire started. Dry leaves, lighter fluid, and the chilling kiss of winter air. A fire pit we made ourselves in the clearing. We placed Okiku on the pile like an offering. As the flames caught, I felt it. A brief moment of relief. But only for a moment. The fire roared, and then it stopped. Just like that. Gone. As though someone had blown it out. No smoke. No embers. The wood was untouched. Dry. Not a single char mark. The doll? Gone. But not gone. She was standing behind us. No longer in the box. No longer still. Her head tilted. Her hair longer now. Reaching her knees. Waving in the wind. But there was no wind. Her eyes? They blinked. My father fell to his knees. "Okiku," he whispered. Then he laughed. That same twisted laugh from behind his locked door. And then he got up and walked straight into the forest. We haven't seen him since. That night, I dreamed of a little girl brushing her hair in a mirror. Not Okiku. Me. But my reflection didn't move the same way. It tilted its head the other direction. It grinned when I cried. And the mirror behind me showed not my room, but a dark hallway filled with dolls. Dozens of them, all watching, all growing hair. When I woke, I found a comb beside my bed, carved from bone. The name Okiku scratched into the handle, and on my pillow, hair. Not mine. Wet, matted, and smelling of grave dirt. I've tried everything. Salt, prayer, iron nails, Buddhist chants, even holy water. It only made the hair grow faster. When I cut it, it grows back overnight. Not just the doll's, mine. I shave my head. It returns, long, black, heavy, like hers, as if I've been chosen to carry something, or worse, to become something. A vessel. Sometimes I find myself sitting in front of the mirror for hours, brushing the hair, not sure how I got there, not sure when I started humming, but always the same lullaby. Now I don't sleep much. I hear her moving around at night, not hiding anymore, not pretending. Sometimes I wake up to the feeling of someone brushing my hair, and sometimes I'm the one brushing hers. 2 days ago, I locked her in the basement. Nails across the door, chains, salt circles, everything I could find. Last night I heard a knock at the door. It was her, not the doll. A little girl, soaking wet, shoeless. Her hair covered her face like a veil. She said only one thing. "Can I come home now?" I shut the door. But this morning, she was on my bed. And her hair had grown past the mattress. It touched the floor. It was moving. I've stopped trying to explain it to people. They look at me like I'm insane. Maybe I am. But I know what I saw. and I know what I feel. This isn't over. Not even close, because the hair keeps growing, and every time I try to cut it, it whispers back. And the voice? It's starting to sound like me. I no longer remember when I last slept. There is no distinction between dreams and waking life anymore. They blur, like hair tangled in water. Impossible to separate strand from strand. The doll still sits silently in my room. But it's not just the doll anymore. It's me. Let me explain. After that night, the one where she appeared on my bed, everything changed. Not all at once. That's not how these things happen. Horror doesn't descend like a hammer. It slides in. A fog in your bones. A hairline crack in your soul. I woke the next morning to find the comb in my hand. The one with her name carved into it. Okiku. I don't remember picking it up, but my fingers wouldn't let go. They had curled around it like claws, pale from tension. And my hair, it wasn't mine anymore. It wasn't just that it was long again. It was different, thicker, colder, heavier. When I brushed it, it hissed like silk against silk. But worse, it moved. Subtle at first, a gentle sway even when the air was still. Then stronger, tugging my head, like it had a will, like it was leading me somewhere. And I followed. The basement door was open. I swear I nailed it shut days ago. But the nails were gone, neatly removed, no sign of splintering. The salt lines were smudged, as if something had stepped over them. And inside, silence. Not absence. Silence. The kind that listens. I stepped down, bare feet on the cold cement. My hand trembled around the flashlight, but even the beam of light felt muted, swallowed by the thick darkness. She was there. Not the doll. The girl. Facing the far wall. Humming. Hair flowing behind her like a bridal train. It sprawled across the basement like roots from an ancient tree. It reached the corners, the ceiling, the pipes. I couldn't move. And then she turned. No face, just hair. A smooth veil of black that pulsed. And I heard the voice from all directions. Not loud, not screaming. Soft. Like a whisper into your very marrow. You combed it for me. Now I comb it for you. That night I dreamed I was underwater, sinking. Hair swirling around me, wrapping me tighter and tighter. It wasn't strangling me, it was binding me, like a cocoon, and I could feel it entering my ears, my mouth, my eyes, becoming me. When I woke, I was on the floor, hair wrapped around my wrists, my ankles, my throat. My reflection in the mirror smiled. I didn't, but it did. I tried burning it all, my hair, the comb, the doll, but the fire refused them, as if they were immune to nature itself. The strands wouldn't catch. They simply blackened, then turned whole again the moment I blinked. I tried drowning it, submerging the doll in the river, but the current flowed away from her. She sat at the bottom, watching me through the ripples, and when I returned home, she was already on my bed. Dry, brushed, waiting. I spoke to a priest. He took one look at the hair in my hand and blanched. He told me not to return. But later that night he called me, sobbing, said the doll was in his dreams, brushing his hair. And then he screamed, a gurgling sound like water choking a throat, and the call cut off. I never heard from him again. They found his body 3 days later, head shaved completely, tongue tied in a noose of black hair. Cause of death, unknown. I knew what I had to do, but it wasn't what people expect. I couldn't destroy the doll, I had to replace it. Okiku was never just the doll. She was memory, pain, a spirit looking for a home. And somehow I had become that home. The brushing, the lullabies, the growing hair. It was all a ritual, a slow grafting. I was being hollowed out so she could fill me. And she was nearly done. There was only one thing left. Acceptance. Last night I sat before the mirror. I lit a candle. I combed my hair. I recited the lullaby. And when I finished brushing, I felt her hands over mine. Not cold, warm, small, childlike. And I whispered, "Okiku." She whispered back, "Kana." We were no longer two. We were one. This morning, I looked into the mirror, and I saw a girl in a kimono. Porcelain skin, dark, wet eyes. Hair, beautiful, endless hair, flowing across the floor, the walls, the ceiling. It pulses now, breathes, grows. And every time someone speaks her name, it grows faster. So I leave this message not as a warning. It's too late for that. This is an invitation. There's a strand of hair tucked into this notebook. Pick it up, just once. Brush it. Call her name. Then close your eyes. And listen. You'll hear it. The comb, the lullaby, the laughter. And soon, you'll find her in your dreams too. Waiting. Forever brushing. Forever growing. Until you become the next Okiku.